Hello guys and welcome back, all 1,900 members of this channel. Today we're going to be talking about Lando Norris and how I think he's probably most likely to usher in the next era of dominance, or the next stage after a Max Verstappen domination. He's probably most likely to lead that charge. Obviously, there are a lot of different teams that can probably take it. People say maybe Aston Martin can build a good car. Maybe Red Bull continues this era of dominance into 2026. Maybe Mercedes gets that act together. That won't happen. But I do think it probably would be Lando Norris. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while, ever since, I guess, McLaren started this year very good. I've been wanting to talk about this, but Lando Norris hasn't really been trending too much. But since he's won in Miami, which we should probably start off at, I think it's a good time to talk about it. I think Miami was a very important race for, I think, two reasons. One, because it shows McLaren's honesty in their upgrades, which we'll touch on in a bit. But first and foremost, it is the first time that Red Bull has been beaten on pure pace for, I'd say, about 2 years. I mean, I can't remember the last time someone genuinely beat Red Bull. Obviously, you have Sainz's performances that have, been the only one to basically beat Red Bull since their fight with Ferrari in 2022. But even if you think about Australia and Singapore, one of them, Red Bull, was having an absolute stinker, and the other one, Max's car blew up. And if Max's car blows up, then Red Bull aren't winning it. I just don't trust Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez has been, I don't want to say he's been hiding behind performances, but he definitely hasn't been at the forefront. If Max is 25 seconds ahead of the next best team, then Sergio Perez is going to be somewhere in the mix in second place. But if Max Verstappen is closer, like he was in Miami, maybe 3 seconds, 5 seconds, I just don't trust Sergio Perez, and I don't think Sergio Perez actually has shown that he himself is the driver that's going to tuck in behind Max Verstappen and stay close. He is still going to be about 10, 15 seconds behind Max. And in Miami, that just so happened to mean that he was about P4, P5 for most of the race, and then he fell back due to admittedly bad strategy by Red Bull, pitting him into traffic. And at the end, he really just didn't have any pace, nearly getting passed by a Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, which, although some may say Lewis Hamilton's doing great, for that car's performance, which I do agree that was pretty weird and cool to see. At the end of the day, he's in a Red Bull. He shouldn't be fighting a Mercedes, at least right now. So it is the first time that McLaren have been, well, it was the first time Red Bull have been beaten on actual pace in a very long time. And speaking of McLaren's upgrades, McLaren have, obviously in 2022 they wasn't so hot, but in 2023 they started the season, they said we're not where we want to be, and they said we are going to be where we want to be with these upgrades coming at this race. And it did happen. It went exactly as they've said. And this season they've started off on a better foot than last year, which has been true. And every time they've said they're going to make an upgrade and it's going to give them this amount of time on the track, it has given them that amount of time. And in fact, in some ways, it's probably over delivered. Even Oscar Piastri, with seemingly half the upgrades, or I'm pretty sure he got like half the upgrades that Norris got. Norris got a full pack. He still, before his whole debacle, was in P2 on pure pace, beating both of the Ferraris. Obviously, the Aston Martin's nowhere to be seen. Red Perez nowhere to be seen. Mercedes nowhere to be seen. So it really is amazing to see, or crazy rather, to see that McLaren have managed to consistently put in upgrades that give them exactly what they're trying to say. They understand, is what I'm trying to get here. They understand where they're going, which can't be understated here. If we just look at those two teams, Aston Martin and Mercedes, Mercedes brought in a whole B-spec car and then seemingly fixed their problems in 2023. And now they're worse than they've ever been. They don't even know what's going on. They've added side pods. They've seemingly changed their design, something that is more readable. At the start of preseason, they were saying the car is more stable. They were saying it's great, it's this, it's that. And then when it came down, when push came to shove, they genuinely don't know what's good and what's bad and what they need to keep and what they need to remove to their car. The same thing with Aston Martin. When Aston Martin had a lot more wind tunnel time, they used that and they managed to catapult themselves with all the investment of Lawrence Stroll. As much as Lance Stroll has been a detriment to Aston Martin, Lawrence has been a net plus to basically every single team he's been at, whether that be Force India or an Aston Martin. He or a Williams, he has genuinely been an asset every time he stepped into a team, especially to save those teams. And it is no different in Aston Martin. He stepped into the team, and with the extra wind tunnel time, with his investment, with his negotiation skills to get people to come in and become aboard with his program of trying to get Aston Martin to fight for a championship, he managed to get Aston Martin in 2023 to a place where they could actually score podiums. But when they started to add upgrades to the car, upgrades we're gonna call them, they went back, or they went a net backwards on the field in comparison to where other teams were progressing forward. And it seems this year, because of how much high, well, I say how much high, they came fifth place, and they're gonna come fifth place this year as well, because even though Mercedes' car's not good, Aston Martin have two major issues. One, they still are they still need some time in the oven to cook to become one of the big dogs, or one of the real big dogs. And two, they have Lance Stroll. So even when they do have like a podium level car or podium type car, their second driver is going to be in P16. So it won't really help them. So as of now, they have had that constriction of the wind tunnel time because of where they placed last year. They have had some negative effects of being so successful, as the successful teams do in this cost cap era. And now they've managed to fall back a bit. And this weekend, it was really wasn't that good for them. And it was starting to feel that although Mercedes are the biggest story, because obviously Mercedes are, the Titans, the 8-time world champions, Aston Martin have quietly started to fall back into where they were pre-Fernando Alonso, I would say. So that is that. But if we go back to the top, I think a great opportunity for McLaren is that obviously Red Bull was losing Adrian Newey, and I think it's a good thing to talk about now. It's team principles, because I've heard a lot of people say, team principles do have a lot of impact. They don't have a lot of impact. Some people say that, for example, Toto Wolff, he inherited Ross Brawn and their progress that they've made on the Mercedes, and then it unintentionally rode that wave of glory for 8 years straight. And I've always protested no. And I think this is a great example. Adrian Newey, well, not Adrian Newey, Christian Horner has been in this era of domination for 4 years now. Well, for 3 years, 22, 23, and now 24. 2021 wasn't domination by any means of a stretch. And we can already see that Red Bull is imploding, and it's imploding starting with the team principle. If you look back in 2010 to 2013, he didn't manage to keep it going for longer than 4 years, Ferrari for 5 years. So it does make it pretty obvious that the team principle has a lot to do with the dream team and keeping, although it may not seem that the team principles aren't actually good at anything, they just kind of sit there on the side. In terms of the glue to keep everyone together, think of like a diagram and everyone's splinting off in different directions, they're all going off in different directions, a team. The team principal is the person that essentially allows all of them to come together. Now, if a couple of links are broken, then they can break off and they can be replaced. But if the team principal starts to falter, not only does he falter, but every single link starts to falter. And you get to see things that are happening in Red Bull right now where there's just so much going on in the team. Like, I personally thought that everything would have died down by now, but it seems like it just keeps on going, one thing after the other, whether it's Christian Horner doing something, whether it's just Verstappen doing something. Max is just trying to focus on driving, but Adrian Newey is now leaving. It's just one thing after the other. You see that Helmut Marko's put clauses in contracts and all that kind of stuff, and it's really bringing a whole divide to the corporate level of the team, not just on track. So really does go to show exactly how much influence the team principles and the people behind the scenes have to do with the team's dominance, not just the driver being good in the car, turning up to the track, okay, but bringing it back down to ground zero. You see that I don't actually think that Red Bull are going to lose all their gains. After hearing a lot of what, people like James Vowles would say, or a lot of other team principals and engineers would say, the 2025 cars are going to be more or less like a B spec of this year's cars, because of how much every team is going to be investing into 2026, which, to my knowledge, we still haven't gotten any word of. If anyone knows when we're going to get any word of 2026 regulations, tell me, because I'm curious. But I don't think they're going to lose all their performance, but I think the biggest hit that Red Bull are probably going to take is the gains they're going to make over a season are going to be they're not going to be as dramatic. You know, last season towards this season with their inventive side pods, you know, Adrian, all the memes going out, Adrian Newey saying, I can fix her. Well, nobody is going to be able to fix the zero pod design now, you know, because stuff like that, we need to be inventive and be very coordinated and smart and use your experience that Adrian Newey ultimately could bring to a team and bring that confidence that even if you are going into a risky direction, that you can pull it off. I think only him and James Allison can probably confidently say that. With them leaving, it really does put the team in a sense where I feel like they're going to be essentially, they've got the foundation completely covered, but they're going to be more hesitant to bring more risky upgrades. And if they do start bringing risky upgrades, the chance of the upgrades not working or, you know, it doing negatively or putting negative effects on the car, it's quite possible, you know. Even their concept now or the way they've changed their car now, it really it's not without its flaws. You know, Max isn't sailing away all the time in every single race. You saw that even in Australia before Sainz caught up to Max, or before Sainz overtook Max, he still looked like it was going to be a somewhat competitive race with the Ferraris in the mix. You know, this race, even before Max Verstappen got the damage, which we will talk about, of the bollard, he was still in very competitive time with the McLarens and the Ferraris. He wasn't 20 seconds ahead. He wasn't a pit stop ahead, and that allowed Norris to capitalize when he did put those laps in. And speaking of Norris, I just want to say that Norris has actually matured into what I think is a very well-rounded driver. Obviously, in 2019 and 2020, he had Carlos with him, but I think his main development really came in 2021 and in 2022 when he was paired with Daniel. Because I remember a lot of I don't want to say articles, but a lot of people were saying he was going to get absolutely washed. A lot of people were saying that Daniel was going to wipe the floor with Lando. Lando was going to get washed. He's going to get shown what the true level is to be a world drivers champion is. And obviously we know how those 2 seasons played out with McLaren paying Daniel 21 million to get out the team. It did not end well. But on the flip side, I think after that, I think Lando genuinely gained a lot of confidence and a lot of belief in himself that he can go toe to toe with anyone. And although Daniel didn't do well, there will be some certain things that he probably would have got from Daniel, that experience that would have allowed him to take that extra edge. And Norris has been one of those drivers, like I'd say an Alex Albon, where for the longest time we've all been saying, give him the car. Like when you give him the car, we really want to know if he can challenge for the title. We all know that in a head-to-head title between Charles and Max, very respectfully, I would pick Max to win the title right now. But if you give Norris versus Max in like a similar car, I just don't see Norris making as many mistakes as a Charles, even though I do see Charles having better ultimate pace. In fact, I would say that Charles has probably the best ultimate pace out of anyone on the field, whether that be qualifying pace or just general banging out fastest laps. What I think he lacks is maybe the keeping of the tires. So sometimes Charles can really cook his tires for no reason, so he can be behind the car trying to overtake, realize he can't overtake, but still press on and really cook his tires behind that car, something Fernando Alonso would love. And it can hurt him. It can hurt him. Where someone like Lando, if you saw that he was behind Perez and he just bided his time, he tried to get past, he realized that he was getting close, chipping away, and he just saved his tires. And as soon as Perez peeled into the pits, he was all attack, and he used every bit of time that he had in those tires to put out fastest laps. And although, you know, personally, it wouldn't have mattered whether he put in fastest laps or not because of the whole safety car situation, and the safety car picked up Max, which gave Norris like a 25-second lead, so he wouldn't have needed the fastest laps anyways. But if he did need the fastest laps, he would have got them. If he did need the fastest laps, they would have been useful, and he would have had them because he did have the pace. And I think Oscar has similar pace, and pound for pound, because of Oscar's experience, I genuinely think in a few years Oscar could potentially beat Norris. But right now he is a bit ripe, and Norris is just very good. Norris is very good. I would think Norris is probably top 4, top 5 on the grid, personally, for me. For me, top 5 is, if I'm being completely objective, I would go, oh, people are going to hate this. I'm going to go Max, Lewis, Fernando, I'm gonna go Charles, and I'm gonna go Norris. I know I said that Norris is better, but Charles is just straight pace is kind of scary, if I'm being honest. Like it is genuinely scary. I think once he gets the whole overdriving the car and going over the limit under control and keeping the tires under control, which you never know, he could get it done this season, and this season he could become a menace for like the second half of the season. But once he gets that under control, Charles is genuinely going to be a multiple time world champion. This guy is incredibly quick. It's actually frightening how quick Charles is. But I just think Piastri needs some time in the oven, and Norris is he's not baked, but he's baked enough to win. Like you know the way Max drives now is not the same way that he was driving in 2021. Not just because there isn't as much competition, but because he's a lot more of a baked driver. You know, he knows exactly what to do now. He's been there. He's had all sorts of different scenarios, and you can win titles without being fully baked, I would say. Whereas you see, took to Monaco in 2021 when Max won. That was not a performance you would get if you watch the race back. That's not like a performance you would get of a driver who isn't or who is baked. That is a performance you get if he is baked. He drove like he had a lot more years than he had. You know the saying like they drive beyond his years. Like that is the type of driving that we're looking to see. And I think that Norris is close to that, or he appears close to that than someone like Charles. But this is Formula One, and we all know it's probably just due to the what we do know actually that it is mostly due to the cars whether you can or cannot challenge for a championship. Unless you're Lance or Sergio, then you would probably lose the championship with like an RB19. But going top five teams. If we were to go top to bottom, obviously Red Bull they could develop a monster of a car and then just keep winning from 25, 26 and onwards in this ground fix era. But in Ferrari, I am discounting. Okay, I'm gonna discount Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso simply because if Fernando Alonso wins the championship in 2025 and 2026, which I don't think he will, but if he does win, same with Lewis Hamilton, they would either most likely retire or they would be like they would start to get a bit deeper into their 40s to where I couldn't tell you whether they would have pace or not. Fernando Alonso is round about the age that Michael Schumacher was when he went to Mercedes, and respectfully, Michael Schumacher was done. Like he was finished. He was not being anyone for the title at that time. That was around 2010 to 2012. So he was not beating Sebastian Vettel for that title. And, Fernando Alonso has definitely pushed the boundaries here. Like, other than maybe Fangio, I don't think there's really anyone that is as old as Fernando Alonso that genuinely has that killer pace. Maybe Kimi Raikkonen had, but, Kimi, at the later end of his career, like, he genuinely was just doing it for fun. So you never saw that killer from Kimi back. Maybe like you saw in the older days of Kimi. But he's redefined, Fernando Alonso has redefined what it meant to be fast and consistency and longevity in Formula One. And I think that's part of the reason that Lewis Hamilton isn't retiring, because he sees that someone like Fernando Alonso can be fast and is older than him. So he almost feels like I can still win and I can still, become a champion if someone like Fernando is there. He always makes comments like that of the sort. And as far as Lewis Hamilton goes, he actually might get a car that can challenge for the championship. But even if he does win in 25 and 26, let's all very be honest, he would probably retire. In fact, I can almost be certain that Lewis Hamilton wouldn't make it to 2026 if he had won the 2020 onboard title. If he'd have been an 8-time world champion, you really think that he would have stayed 3 years winless in Mercedes? Oh, there's no way. He would have retired this year or last year. He wouldn't. He would have been. What's the point? Like he wouldn't have needed another win, over 100 wins first to do. He wouldn't have needed another pole position. He wouldn't have needed another title. It's like a drop of water in an ocean to him. Pole positions, they're good now for Lewis, but when Lewis was getting they mean nothing. Wins are great, but he's got 100 of them, So really and truly, he's looking for that championship. And if he gets 2 of them, he'd most likely be out, or he'd be out as soon as the car isn't competitive, which, you never know. So I'm going to discount both of them because they're old. If you look at Charles, obviously I said that Charles just needs a little bit more time in the oven. And that Ferrari team do have the chance to get a world championship, but because of the whole Lewis situation and Charles, and the fact that Ferrari are self-sabotaging masters, I'm not sure whether I would back them to usher in the next era of dominance, which I would classify as at least 3 years. For it to be dominant, you need a first year when everyone loves you. You need a second year where you really start to where you start to kill your opposition and everyone's bored of you. And you need a third year when people are begging for you to stop. That's what I call dominance, at the very least, you know? You need that 3 stages. We want you because you just broke the last year of dominance. Okay, this is kind of suspicious. You're winning everything. And oh no, we're in another era of dominance. You need those 3 separate layers. And I just don't think Ferrari at this stage, maybe if Adrian Newey goes, Fred Vasseur, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, you know, maybe after a couple of years, Lewis retires, get someone else in, maybe get Ollie Behrman in. Hey, you never know. Play his wingman. Charles Leclerc is going to be more developed. Maybe. It could happen. It could happen, you know. But off of what we know, off of what I know right now, in this second, I would say that there are other teams more poised to take that. And if we go down, obviously we have McLaren, we'll skip them, and we'll go to Aston Martin. Aston Martin, I don't think they're going to make a championship contending car. In 2023, I didn't have a YouTube channel. I didn't have this YouTube channel. And I personally said that they was not going to get third or second in the constructors. I think that was just obvious, personally. I knew that Mercedes were going to clean them their act. I knew that Ferrari were going to stop being inconsistent. And I just knew that because of Lance Stroll, they were probably going to get fifth. Obviously, I didn't think that McLaren were going to get such a leg up. But, yeah, to me, there was just no way they was going to get third or whatever in the constructors. And even now, they're going to get fifth in the constructors. I'm telling you, they're going to get fifth. Even if they get a car that is third best, they're going to get fifth. Because it's one man fighting against two. And all you need is for Fernando Alonso to have a couple of weekends where Mercedes get him, and that's 2 cars scoring 2 lots of points that will essentially override the points that he's getting for weeks on end. As bad as the Mercedes is, like, they're still better than Lance Stroll in a better Aston Martin, sadly. So until Aston Martin gets serious, they're going to remain the 5th best team, or maybe even worse if other teams decide to rise up. Because in 2026, if you get, I don't want to say a big 6, or I'll say this, if you change the point scoring system to where you can score points up to, I don't know, 12th or 15th or 20th, whatever they want trying to change it to be, which personally, since we are talking about it, I actually am in favor of points going down to 15th. Not quite 20th, because that could potentially mean that you could DNF and still get points. I don't know how that would work. And I don't want it to be like someone's getting lapped, literally encountering no one, and they end up with points, you know? Like, I'm just not with it. If you want to enhance racing, there's other things you can do, except for, you know, rewarding people. It's basically a participation award. I know people have said a lot, but I think it's kind of too. And I think like P13, P15 is just close enough to 10th place where right now, like if you get to like P13, P15, that fight for 10th place, oh, chef's kiss. Between the Haas's and the Visa Cash Apps or the sugar-free Red Bulls, as what's his name, Angry Ginge says, that fight is beautiful every single race. Whether it is in Japan, where Stroll's trying to, you know, prove he's not a disappointment, whether it is in Australia, where Yuki Tsunoda's pulling off miracles, whether it is so good every single race. Next race you watch, pay attention to the P9 to about P15 fight. That fight is glorious. It's so good. So if you extend points down to about P15, I think that fight just gets, oh man, it gets so good. I just love that fight. That fight, I don't know why that fight is so big. Those cars are just so packed together and they're so competitive. I'm just laughing because that's where you get like the crazy driving of like Magnussen, and Magnussen's been on a wild streak. I mean, ever since Saudi Arabia, where Magnussen has decided he's a one-man army to hold up anyone that's going to get in Nico Hulkenberg's way to get points. I mean, I love it. I love it. It's kind of annoying, you know, when he does it to your favorite driver, but like at the same time, this guy is pushing the limits of what is allowed. He's actually really close to a race ban. He's at 10 penalty points, and if you get, you know, if you got 12 in 12 months, I believe, then you get a race ban. So basically, and they generally speaking, they give like 2 penalty points if you get into like a bad incident that's your fault. So if he gets into like another collision that's his fault, and he gets he's gonna get a race ban, which is crazy. But I have seen people say that maybe Ollie Behrman should step into that car for the race ban if he does get a race ban, which would be kind of interesting to see what Ollie Behrman does with a full race weekend, but with a team that's barely points worthy. He'd probably get like a P15. He'd be in that battle. Yeah, we'd see some racecraft. But going back up again, if any of those teams decide to take that little bit of a step up and do an Aston Martin, then I think Aston Martin could put themselves in a rough place because, well, they just, I mean, I don't want to say they're not serious. Lawrence Stroll is serious. Fernando Alonso is serious. Everyone at the factory is serious. But they need a bit more time cooking in terms of the infrastructure and their team to solidify and to get that vision in place. And they also need to get rid of Lance Stroll because Lance is just not an asset to the team. Like some drivers, as in when Russell is not doing the best as he was this weekend, Lewis is picking up the points, and Lewis is obviously a 7-time world champion. And when Lando Norris was in P6, Piastri was in P2. He was doing well. He was gonna pick up big points. But there's nothing to be said about what's his name, Lance Stroll. If Fernando Alonso's doing well, you can put your bottom dollar. You can put your bottom dollar. Stroll's not doing well. You can pay every pound you've got that Stroll ain't doing well. 100%, mate. So I just think the time has come. Genuinely, the time has come. But moving on to the Mercedes boys. These guys, first of all, Lewis is leaving. And we don't know who George's teammate is going to be. So I'm just going to be talking about George. I personally think, strange enough, I think George is lacking. George, in my opinion, he lacks certain attributes some of those other feisty young drivers have that just separate him a little bit. And I don't think it's because he's not able, because to keep it completely frank with you, in the junior categories in like F2 and below, George was bodying Charles, he was bodying Albon, he was bodying Norris, he was bodying everyone. He was taking souls. He was destroying. When George Russell came to F1 with Lando and the whole cohort, he was the best prospect in terms of talent, but he got the worst car. And I think that probably hurt him the most simply because he had 3 years, or 19, 20, 3 years of essentially running around, just running in free practice mode in the race. He wasn't racing anyone, whilst Charles was fighting people in the Sauber and in the Ferrari, whilst Norris was in a midfield car, in that deep midfield in that 2020 and 2021, when that midfield was packed. The 2020 midfield is goated. That is a midfield fight for the ages. When that midfield between, McLaren, Racing Point, Renault, that was disgusting midfield. That was disgusting. I loved it. Midfield fights and P10 to 50 fights. Sign me up, man. Sign me up. I love those fights. But Norris was a part of those fights. Norris was leading those fights. He would have gotten McLaren third place in 2021 had it not been for Daniel being so. Well, I was gonna say incompetent. I don't want to say incompetent. We're gonna say he underperformed, to say the least. He underperformed that year. But Norris was single-handedly dragging them to third place. Norris was honing those skills. I'm telling you, in 2021, Norris honed those skills. You have Alex Albon, where now he's in a Williams. In 2019, he had that whole deal in Toro Rosso and in Red Bull. In 2020, he was in the Red Bull. So he was honing those skills as well. And he was honing them at the top level against Max Verstappen, against the big boys. So you have George Russell, who has the talent, but he's genuinely, he's kind of just been, not frauded out, but he's been deprived of a few years of racing in terms of wheel-to-wheel action and really honing that racecraft that you need to not make mistakes. And that's probably one of the reasons we've seen him make certain mistakes in terms of lack of attention, whether you like it or not. Mistakes as in, dropping the ball and hitting people. Mistakes as in simply losing the car and spinning out like he did in Canada last year. Mistakes. And speaking of mistakes, I don't like the FIA, and maybe I get a bad rap because I don't like the FIA, and some people get mad in the comments because I don't like the FIA. But remember when I went on a whole tirade in Australia because I said it was George Russell's fault because he was looking at his dash instead of looking at Fernando Alonso ahead, and Fernando got a 20-second time penalty. Fernando got a 20-second time penalty. Can someone tell me why Sergio Perez, who nearly assassinated both Ferraris, didn't get anything? He didn't even get investigated. He got investigated for a false start, not for the actual move into turn one. It was insanity. You mean to tell me what Fernando Alonso did was worth a 20-second time penalty, but what Perez did was not worth investigation at all? Even Crofty and Martin were saying that it just doesn't make sense, some of the things that are going on. And Lewis, who, although he did hit Fernando, he was a lot more controlled with what he went on the inside. He got investigated, but then got... It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I've heard a lot of people say things about what the rules are in terms of will-to-will combat, and for me personally, from what I can see, right, because what the FIA says and what the FIA does is two different things. From what I can see, it seems like if you have the inside line and someone tries to go around the outside of you, you can run them out as much as you want. Like, even if they are halfway along, it's still your corner because you're on the inside. Where you have to give someone racing room is where, or, I mean, obviously, if there's a wall on the outside and you run them and they hit the wall, then that's your fault. But if there's, if there's room to run off, then FIA don't care. If you go on the outside of someone and someone comes up your inside and they come halfway along the inside, that's when you actually absolutely have to give them racing room, because most drivers will run another driver off track if they come around the outside of you, because inside is their corner. And the FIA won't do anything about it unless the driver either spins out, crashes, or gets stuck in the gravel in Austria in turn 6 or 7. That's the only time that they ever talk about it, because that means that the driver that went on the outside, who was halfway along, got some sort of damage or impediment, and now they have to look into it because technically, he was well within his right to go on the outside and get some space, technically. But in practice, as long as he doesn't, end up in the gravel or end up crashing, if I don't care, push him wide as much as you want. So just wanted to say that little tirade because of Magnussen's crazy driving. I don't know how we got a 10-second time penalty for his and Sargent's crash. I put it as like a racing incident. I can understand a couple of different things. I don't know how he got a 10-second time, but I would have put it closer to a racing incident. I've heard some people be pretty harsh on Sargent for not looking up his inside, but it's a difficult corner. But yeah, it's difficult. I would say it's a racing incident. Personally, I would say it's a racing incident, but yeah, it's just me. So yeah, there's that. But the Mercedes boys, I just don't think that Mercedes are even going to give him a car. Mercedes have shown a full, not I want to say incompetence, but they've shown a full lack of the ability to understand this regulation of cars. And I think now it's become very apparent that they probably won't be able to understand this regulation of cars by the time the cars end, By the time they've really got a grasp of it, it'll be over. James Allison took a break from Mercedes in 2021 to 2022 and left it up to Mike Elliott. Mike Elliott designed the no-pod design, and obviously we know how that went. And now it seems like, even though James Allison's come back, trying to right the wrongs and trying to catch up to a team like Red Bull, it's proving very difficult. I don't want it to make it look like Mercedes isn't making any progress, because they actually are making a lot of progress, because essentially they started from ground zero twice. Teams like Red Bull have been building off of 2022 4 years ago. Mercedes have been building a new car every single year. Sometimes even halfway through the year they've been building a new car in terms of their B-spec models. So let's give them some credit for actually putting these cars together that are still somewhere in the mix where their drivers can get podiums and can challenge, because many other teams would crumble. I don't trust another team to have to build a new car every single year and still... Okay. I don't trust many other teams to build new cars and still actually manage to get their cars into the realm of competitiveness that Mercedes have done. So give them credit there, but obviously the expectation is that Mercedes are going to challenge for championships. They're going to win world titles. You know, they've got a hot shot in George Russell. They've got, you know, the old head in Lewis Hamilton, and it just hasn't happened. And I just don't think it will happen, simply because I just think the gap is very big and it's going to take a lot. Maybe it's possible, but the gap is very big. I think what they can hope for is that they can win some races. I think genuinely starting to win races and be like an odd race winner, like every 3, 4 races, they can win races, but maybe they don't win the championship. I genuinely think, as a Mercedes fan, right now, I would settle for that next year. And in terms of 2026, obviously that's some new regulations, and we'll see what the regulations are consistent of in terms of aero, because I think that'll be the biggest key factor. Because even if we make a killer engine, both our suppliers or both our customer teams are ahead of us, which is kind of crazy. I'm not sure if Aston Martin get gearboxes from Mercedes as well. They probably do, actually, because the actual Aston Martin cars, like the Vantage and stuff on the road, do actually use, some of them do use Mercedes gearboxes. So maybe they do actually have a contract to get Mercedes gearboxes in terms of the Formula One. But I'm not sure about like McLaren. I'm not sure whether they get, or if it's just the engine, or if it's a transmission, or it's parts of suspension. Yeah, I don't know about that. But it seems to me that out of all these teams, you know, McLaren have, although they've started 2022 not the greatest, in 2023 they said we're not here, we can get to this place by this place, done. 2023, so we're probably about this place, done. They said we're going to bring upgrades that are going to give us this time, done. Our drivers are very much poised and ready to go. We've got a very strong driver lineup, good. And now, if McLaren say they've got 5 new upgrades that should give them 6 tenths, I think I'm going to start believing them. And so if they are to pick a driver right now that would, or a team right now that would be able to dominate for 4 years, simply because of consistency, I would say, other than Red Bull, it would be McLaren, because obviously Ferrari, inconsistent. Mercedes probably won't even get there in the first place. Aston Martin probably won't get there in the first place. Probably is McLaren. And in terms of the driver pairing, I think that Lando Norris would probably dominate more. At the end, I would say that Oscar Piastri will probably nick the title from him, and it will probably turn into a Senna Prost, which I'll be very much happy to see. One day, Piastri is gonna click in for him, and he's just gonna start being the most aggressive driver. I can feel it. This guy has got some real class about him. But for now, till that happens, Lando Norris is not only the number 1 in the team, but he is a very fast driver, very composed driver, has a lot of qualities of a multiple-time world champion. And if McLaren gives him the car, who knows? Maybe he might actually become a multiple-time world champion. This is a slightly different episode because did I mention I recorded this like 4 times and then tried to edit it and stuff like that, and it was just a nightmare. Like, it was an absolute nightmare. So for now, until I get the actual video I meant to promote out, or meant to put out, this is what we've got, and you know, it's a little podcast style. Yeah. Ciao.